It's Monday. I'm Kyle. And because it's Monday, that means just there. Beside me on the screen is, of course, Pierre McGuire. It's McGuire Monday. Pierre, before we dig into some things we're going to dig into today, I'd like to know, how was your weekend, sir?
My weekend was fantastic. It was a little wet and rainy up here in the northern part of Quebec, but that being said, I watched a lot of golf, I watched a lot of soccer, and I played a little golf and I did a lot of working out. So it's all good. It was a great weekend.
Pierre McGuire, you are a man of many mysteries, but your love of golf and thus hockey is not one of those or two of those mysteries. Okay, we're going to dive into the Leafs because the last time I talked to you solo, Pierre, we went through all of the many new roster additions. We talked about what they bring to the table, how they will fit into this roster, how they will fit into this team. But I think it's important to also revisit a lot of the key players returning to this team and talk about how they will mesh with these new guys, what they need to change from last season. Leafs team as a whole now, man to man, is going to improve because they should, in fact, be improved. So let's, of course, start with the captain himself, Austin Matthews. What are your thoughts on the season he had last year? What are your thoughts on what needs to be different this year?
I thought his season last year was pedestrian at best, but if you look at it, to be fair, the numbers don't lie. He only played in 60 games, but most players in the league, if they played in 60 games, would love to have 27 goals. They'd love to have 26 assists. The truth of the matter is, though, last year was only the second time in a 10-year NHL career that he was a minus player. You have to go back to 18 and 19 when he was a -9. Last year he was a -4. There were parts to his game that just weren't complete. His down low coverage wasn't as good as what it has been in the past. His forechecking ability wasn't as good as it has been in the past. There wasn't a lot of second and third efforts like we've seen in the past. And natural talent is clearly there. But I thought his season last year was pedestrian, Kyle. At best, I would give him a B, and he needs to be an A+ player if the Leafs are going to go to the next level. And I think he can get to that point this year.
And I think, in fairness as well, Pierre, I think he'd agree with everything you just said there on a personal level, like man to man. He knows he was off, but this is a squad that was off. There was something
Mhm.
wrong with it the entire season, and it's just that can have such a deflating effect on a team. And then, of course, the injury at the end of the season, he'll be coming back from that. It looks like recovery. He should be back on track to play his usual game again. But it is what it is, and we've talked about this before. He's not a very vocal captain, but I think he's handled things quite well this offseason from the perspective of keeping relatively quiet and letting this new management group do their thing. I loved, and you loved, the video message he sent to McKenna at the draft.
Mhm.
He's doing perhaps the right things by, at this point, not being very vocal. Not that he's a super vocal captain to begin with, but that's not always necessary. I think you can provide leadership through understanding and patience, and he may have done exactly that this offseason.
I agree with everything you just said, Kyle. There's a couple other things. The addition of Daniel Alfredson to the coaching staff brings a former captain of a Canadian based market that went to a Stanley Cup final into the mix, and also Matt Sundin. People forget they don't put enough focus on Matt Sundin. Everybody's talking about John Chayka. Matt Sundin's coming in and brings instantaneous street cred with all those players because he was a captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He has had successful years in the National Hockey League. He was an Olympic gold medal winner. I mean, you can go down the line. Matt Sundin was a first overall pick, just like Austin Matthews. If there needs to be some fine tuning over the course of the year, Jim Hiller might be part of it, but I'm going to be willing to bet there'll be more than one or two dinners between Matt Sundin and Austin Matthews if there are any issues that Austin's experiencing.
And Matt Sundin is the perfect transition point to talk about the next player on this team that I want to address. And he is arguably as big a piece to this whole thing as Austin Matthews is. That's, of course, William Nylander.
Mhm. Well, Willie last year had a great year offensively with 30 goals and 79 points. The -14 isn't going to make him happy. It's not going to make his father happy, Michael. It's not going to make the Leaf fans happy. But the truth of the matter is, you touched on something that's really important. Something ailed this team right from the start of the year. It was really apparent where Michael Nylander would talk to William Nylander, and I had the honor of coaching Michael. He would probably say, okay, you're at the point of your career now where it's time to lead by example. Some of the off-ice shenanigans that we saw in the press box, in particular, giving the finger to the TV camera and all that stuff, not being dressed appropriately upstairs, that stuff's got to go away. That's where Matt Sundin does play a role in this. I really believe that. Willie Nylander is a tremendous all-world talent. We all know that. Last year, I think his season was probably a B, a lot like Austin, but he needs to be at least an A player if the Leafs are going to be successful. And I do believe he can do that.
And another player that we talked about pretty frequently last season, I would say. But he's interesting because there's a younger guy who is on this new contract and he has like he had good offensive numbers. I'm of course talking about Matthew Nyes, but it does seem as though through our conversations you felt, and I agreed with you, and the popular press agreed as well. There's something missing from Matthew Nyes' game, an element they expected him to bring that perhaps wasn't there.
Physicality more than anything else. Be aggressive on the forecheck. Dominate. He's a huge man, 6'3", about 225. He can really skate. There's a reason why he was drafted where he was drafted. He was a second-round pick. But he was phenomenal with Logan Cooley at the University of Minnesota. I watched him a ton his draft year, watched him a ton his entire World Junior career, and obviously playing in Olympics and all those different things that he was a part of. And he was great to start his pro career playing with Austin Matthews and obviously Mitchell Marner. But I look at last year in particular, no physicality, not nearly enough second and third effort. We talked about that with Austin. And then this number, I know people aren't really hung up because of all the analytics and everything else on the plus minus stat. That kid was minus 30 last year, Kyle. It wasn't like he was minus 10, he was minus
Yeah.
30. You got to work really hard to be minus 30. And I'm being facetious.
Yeah.
Clearly, he wasn't paying attention to detail in his own zone either. Yeah, there were other guys that made mistakes, but he was part of that. Like I said, his line mate most of the year, Austin Matthews, he was minus 4. This guy was minus 30.
Yeah.
Like, that's got to be better. And the physicality part of his game's really got to be better.
Yeah, and obviously you would expect a dip in a plus minus when a team suddenly tanks as bad as the Leafs did last year. But to drop from being positive, he was +1 year one, +9, +7 to -30, as you say. The element to his game maybe doesn't completely correct that, but this Leafs team is being shaped towards something that will involve more physicality. They've put some big bodies out there, and he needs to step up and be one of them. Again, his offensive number production, if you get 66 points from him every season, that's about where you'd want him to be, I imagine. Maybe there's a few more goals on the board, maybe a few less. But I think seeing him be more physical is really the hole in his game he needs to fill.
One of the things I'd do if I was a coaching staff in Toronto, I'd get a tape of Dustin Brown when he was a captain of the LA Kings and they were winning Stanley Cups. And I can tell you, I did all their Stanley Cup runs. I did a lot of their runs where they didn't make the Stanley Cup final, but they were really good in the playoffs. No player personified what Matthew Nyes needs to be more than Dustin Brown. He was a feared forechecker. I used to be between the benches and I would hear guys from the other team saying, "You got to get a hold up on Brown. He's killing us back here." And I'm telling you, that was around the league. If Austin Matthews could ever convince Matthew Nyes to be like that, it would be unbelievable for Austin. It'd be great for the Leafs, and Matthew Nyes' game would go to a whole other level. That's kind of where he needs to be. And if I were coaching this team, that's one of the players I'd utilize. And I'd say, hey, the tape might be a bit grainy, but this is what you got to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So, and now I want to look at a couple of players whose I think just by default of the roster additions, by them aging a little bit, specifically the first guy here with the age, John Tavares' role has been very interesting since he came to the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's been the captain. He has uh, given his captaincy to Austin Matthews, which we both agreed was the right move, and the way he handled it was the ultimate act of
Yes.
professionalism. He's maintained an offensive presence, though 2 years ago when he had such a great regular season, he did tail off in the playoffs. And I personally believe that's because his workload and the expectations of him at his age were too high that season. Now coming back into this season, look at he had 71 points. He didn't miss a regular season game last year. 71 points. That's great offensive production, but what will his role be in this new look roster now?
I think it'll be a little bit diminished in terms of doing the heavy lift and winning big defensive zone faceoffs. You got Nick Paul that can do that.
Mhm.
You got Teddy Bluger that can do that. You got Colton Sissons that can do that. So that's going to alleviate some of the stress on Johnny T. He's 35, turning 36. He turns 36 near the end of September. But you look at his numbers for last year, he was probably the most consistent Toronto Maple Leaf in every facet of the game. So much respect and admiration for John Tavares. I thought last year he was a solid B plus. If he's a solid B plus again this year, Kyle, the Toronto Maple Leafs have a real good team because that means that everybody above him is going to be playing better. But I thought last year, especially because you knew he was super motivated to try to
Mhm.
play in the Olympics. He didn't make it for Canada, but I could tell every game I was watching, that kid never quit. He never quit in any game. Again, so much respect and admiration for John Tavares. He's a true champion, and I hope he does get his name on the Stanley Cup. And doing it in Toronto would be phenomenal for him.
Would be phenomenal on so many levels for so many reasons,
Yeah.
Pierre. I can't wait for that show, but I'm not going to plan the parade just yet. I'm not one of those people. Okay, now and another player whose role is absolutely changing this season, but he's now going to find himself in a very familiar role,
Yeah.
looking ahead of a starting number one goaltender he has looked at in the past, Anthony Stolarz between the pipes.
Clean slate for him. Remember last year at the start of the year, maybe some bad verbiage in the dressing room talking about different things around the team. I don't think that got a lot of respect from his teammates. I think obviously they all said the right stuff, but I think there were probably some hard feelings. Been through that before, coaching wise, and you got to try to stabilize that as quick as possible. So new coaching staff comes in, slate is clean for everybody. He's going to be in a perfect situation, insulating Bobrovsky. I expect he's going to have a good year. I don't expect him to start more than 25 times this year. And that's perfect for him because of all the
Yeah.
injuries. You see, last year he played 26 games. I would say if he started 25 games this year, that'd be great. But that save percentage has to go up above 900, and the goals against has to come down below 3.
Yeah, I feel as though he may perform. I think we're gonna potentially see a repeat of that dynamic duo that we saw in Florida,
Yeah, I agree.
where the right guy has the most pressure on him. He's the true number one on this team, but it's also reduces some of his pressure knowing he's got such a stalworthy backup to come in and take the load off him for those 22 to 30 games. As you stated, he'll fall somewhere in that range if all things go to according to plan. 25 sounds like the right number to me,
Yeah,
Pierre.
no, that's about
Bobrovsky's
where
not
it
getting
should be.
young. He's
That's
not
about where
getting
it should
younger.
be. No, but Kyle, that's about where it should be for him at
Yeah.
this age in his career too. He's a big guy. The first time I ever saw him play big time hockey, he was playing at Nebraska Omaha. It didn't work out that great. He ended up going to play for the London Knights. But I can tell you right now, that kid was always a really good player, and he was a guy that always had a chance to really make a difference. I think
Yeah.
he's got a chance to make a big difference in Toronto.
I don't disagree with you at all. I think this new dynamic setup is we can put this goaltending thing to rest in theory. It's all just
Agreed.
on paper right now,
Agreed.
Pierre, but I do like how that paper's reading currently. Okay, let's talk about a couple of, here's some important guys. Defense for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And we talk the defense to death. You talk the defense to death everywhere you could speak about it, Pierre, because this was a big problem for this team. Returning Oliver Ekman-Larsson, what is his role on this new roster?
I think it's great because he's probably going to have less pressure. It's going to be a little bit like what Michael Matheson does in Montreal, play bigger minutes but less pressure minutes, if that makes sense. He's a
Mhm.
left shot who can play the right side or the left side. He's played over 1,000 games in the National Hockey League. That's a lot of experience. I think the fact that the coaching staff knows how to insulate players because Jimmy Hiller's been through a lot of long runs. He'll be Daniel Alfredson's been through a lot of long runs. They'll know how to insulate the player, which I think is really important. I think Oliver's going to be really an important player for this team because he's one of the few guys that not only can transport the puck, but can pass his way out of trouble. And that's something the Leafs desperately need. And I think they've identified that by bringing in Emil Andre, by bringing in Darren Radish. They brought in guys that can actually move the puck, not so much transport it, but move it. Ekman can do both. He can transport it and he can move it.
Yeah, he definitely can. And one more defenseman who, he didn't have a role to play last year because he was
Yeah,
injured. I think he only appeared in 11 games,
yeah.
but we've talked about him and the importance he has if he is healthy to this team, Chris Tanev.
Christopher's such an important player. You know, the first time, again, I go a long way back with my son play at Rochester Institute of Technology. That's way back before he signed as an undrafted player with the Vancouver Canucks back in 2010, 2011. In all his years in the league, almost 900 games, he has never once ever been a minus player. I looked it up this morning because I just wanted to make sure I was ready for you. He's a plus 161. That brings unbelievable ability to kill penalties, match up against the other team's best players. And remember before when I was telling you about Oliver Ekman-Larsson having less pressure? If Tanev's in the lineup and McCabe stays healthy, that takes so much pressure off of Oliver Ekman-Larsson, so much pressure off of Darren Radish. This guy's a really important player for this team. And if he plays the way he's capable of and stays healthy, that's huge news for the Leafs.
And when he's healthy, he's a big body that plays like one. And that is one of the crucial things about this Toronto Maple Leafs defensive team. It's not just the puck movement, it's what happens when they don't have the puck. And those big bodies down low are
Mhm.
going to need to be more effective at pushing and shoving, quite frankly.
And you know what? They don't need any points from him. Zero. He
No,
doesn't have to
no.
score one goal. He doesn't have to have one assist. He needs to be elite as a penalty. Now, the one strength for Toronto last year, their penalty kill, they were eighth in the league. But he needs to be a big part of that penalty kill. He needs to be a big part of the matchup situation. And I think more than anything else, he needs to bring guys together at the end of periods and at the end of games where they know they can trust him to come up with a big stop and not put the rest on the Leaf goaltending.
And I want to mention someone else, Pierre, very specifically because of the position he plays. And this is someone that, you and I have talked privately about. You've always been big on this guy, but because he plays in the center and, center depth is an endless conversation for this hockey team and all NHL franchises now, to be fair. What about Dakota Joshua?
He's got to really do now. Offensively, he did pretty well. I know he had 10 goals last year, but here's the biggest thing on Dakota. He's got to find his identity as a player. A little bit
Mhm.
like Matthew Nyes, physical without taking penalties. Establish a physical presence in your own zone on the boards. Really good board play. Do a real good job chipping pucks in and winning races to get to those pucks that you chip in. The one thing I'm really excited about, he has a relationship with Teddy Bluger from their time in Vancouver together.
Yeah.
Teddy's a leadership kind of a guy. I've known Teddy for a long time as a college player, as a pro player in Pittsburgh, before he moved along to Vegas and then obviously to Vancouver. So there's a lot there, but I think that relationship's going to help Dakota. He's got to stay healthy. He's got to get into at least 65 or more games. And if he can get his goal totals up to about 12 to 15, which I don't think would be that hard for him, that would be huge news for the Leafs. Huge.
It would be, Pierre. There are some names that are returning on this roster that I didn't put on my formal list, but we can still discuss them. But there's a reason some of these guys weren't listed, and you can start that list, of course, with Max Domi, who definitely had a down year. We learned later that he'd been playing with an injury most of the year, but the complications from his surgery now have left his status in question for next season. Let's assume he returns relatively shortly into the season. What needs to change with his game?
Just consistency, and they have to develop a role for him. I don't think Max had a role last year. Part of the time he was playing center, part of the time he was on the first line,
Mhm.
right wing, part of the time he was on the third line playing as a depth player. They just really he never found an identity. And I'm not blaming Craig Berube, who I thought did the most he could with the talent that he had, but they got to find an identity for Max going forward. When Max has been the very best Max Domi can be, he's always played to an identity. Ferocious, winning races on the forecheck, strong with slot area presence to create offense, and a real good playmaker. But last year, that was not apparent. I think the injury was part of that. And I just think because there was something ailing the team the whole year, he wasn't able to find that identity.
Yeah, he really wasn't. But I mean, we just don't know to what extent he was actually playing with that injury, how bad it was throughout the whole season. Has to be a little bit of a benefit of the doubt there, hoping that he can recover from that. Kind of a fluky, unfortunate cycle of news with him in this offseason, but we wish him well and we hope he can return to form. Anyone else on this roster that you would highlight, just that's going to see a changing role or going to perhaps have renewed optimism for their presence and their performance with this team, Pierre?
Most underrated player for the Toronto Maple Leafs last year, in my humble opinion, was Jake McCabe. I thought Jake had a fantastic year. He doesn't need to do too much. He's a lot like Tanev, except he plays on the other side. He's got to be really stout defensively. He's got to be an elite penalty killer. Don't try to step out of your role and become an offensive player. That's not your thing. Jake McCabe's a leader. He's a champion. He was a gold medal winning captain of Team USA when they won a gold medal in the World Junior in Ufa, Russia, back in the mid 2000s. So I would just say this: he's probably the guy that I'm hoping has another really strong year, and if he does, that just makes that defense so much better.
Okay, Pierre, I want to conclude with this. I am not one to go down the rumor mill, but I don't know, something about this one feels like it may very well happen, but let's discuss it because the chances of this news breaking between now and when this airs or later today or even tomorrow, it seems fairly reasonable that this could happen. And there are rumors that there will be a return of James Van Riemsdyk to
Mhm.
Toronto. So assuming that did happen, what could he add to this roster?
Depth offense for sure. Stability in the dressing room because he's not going to be intimidated by big moments. And again, knowing James as long as I have, whether it was before he went to UNH, playing at World Juniors for Team USA, James Van Riemsdyk is a total class act. He's a fantastic human being, great relationship with Austin Matthews. He brings great second power play presence. His hand-eye coordination is still very strong and aware and apparent. And it just gives you that supplemental offense you have to have if you're going to be a team that's going to be able to overcome injuries over the course of the season. So I think he brings a lot.
It's interesting that you just mentioned Austin Matthews again. We started with him, so let's close with him again because he is the key piece of this franchise, obviously. You know, you talk about his relationship, JVR, of course, I'm referring to now with Austin Matthews. If he joins this team, he would not be the only person put in place this offseason that has an established relationship with Matthews. And it does seem like if this is another signing the Leafs are going to make or another player they're going to acquire, it seems like this management team has put a specific focus on building a support system around Austin Matthews that isn't necessarily just about talent, but is about dressing room relationships, off ice relationships, the general comfort of their captain.
I went through this back in the early 90s in Pittsburgh. Craig Patrick and Bob Johnson were smart enough to identify that they had to do something to insulate Mario Lemieux. And they did. They did a fantastic job. Bob, before he passed away, did an amazing job, and Craig was just off the charts brilliant when he did all this building around Mario. I don't see any difference between Mario and Austin in terms of trying to insulate your superstar player. And I think they've done a good job of that. The fact that he's got a really good relationship with Jim Hiller is huge. I think that speaks volumes, is that they're paying attention to this stuff. The fact they brought in Daniel Alfredson, I think, says a lot because Alfie was such a respected player around the league. I know fans in different cities didn't like him, but I can tell you, I had the honor of coaching that man. And he's a very, very admired guy around NHL situations, just like James Van Riemsdyk is. So I think you're onto something. Building around Austin is a big part of this. And Keith Pelly, I know he's not taking any credit for any of this stuff, and maybe it's better they stay in the background, but he understands star power. Pelly's been around the NFL, he's been around the NHL, he's been around Major League Baseball, he's been around the NBA, and he's been around the DP World Tour in golf. He understands the importance of star players, and he's been around many Olympics. And the biggest one being 2010 in Vancouver. I worked for him there. And all I can tell you is he understands the importance of insulating stars. And he's done that or helped done that with Austin Matthews.
Pierre, it's been an absolutely wild offseason for this Toronto Maple Leafs team. I believe that this fan base should be shrouded in enthusiasm right now. We've gone through just about the entire roster over the last couple of weeks, but there's so much more for this group to do because they actually have to now step onto the ice, skate together, learn each other's games, iron out inconsistencies from last season. And really, more than anything, I think for this team is to really focus on putting last season behind them and leaving it there because it was a failure from just about any angle, but it does happen. And if you are a returning roster member, which we've gone over today, you have to be enthusiastic about the effort the management team that's now in place has put into rebuilding this roster so this team can, in fact, look forward.
How before we go, I just want to stress again, everybody's got a clean slate. This is a brand new coaching staff. They're ready to go and work with the players as the players produce. If you don't produce, you're going to sit back. If you do produce, you're going to move forward. That's fair. That's what every player wants to have. They don't want to be handed anything. And I think the truth of the matter is that's kind of the way John Chayka seems to be setting this up. I know that's the way Matt Sundin was when he played. I coached against him for years. And I really like the trajectory and the direction of this group right now. I think it's so good. Not getting nearly enough credit around hockey, probably because this is a slow time for hockey people. But there's Toronto's headed in the right direction. And one other thing, nobody's talking about the fact that they won the Calder Cup. Yes, I know you have, but most people just look at it and say, we'll just push it aside. A lot of those young kids that won that Calder Cup, and Easton Cowan was part of it, those guys come to camp supercharged because they see light at the end of the tunnel. They see the opportunity to take the game to the next level and maybe make an NHL paycheck. And that makes camp competitive and that pushes guys to be better. And I think that will be part of what makes this team better. They're going to be coming out of camp really supercharged.
Pierre, I think the farm systems in hockey play a very unique role in that, baseball is similar to this too, but basketball and football are not. But at least in hockey and baseball, farm system success is often a predicator of a big league success. And in hockey, very specifically, a championship mindset and winning is infectious. It just is. Things filter up in hockey, things filter back down. And I think you have to look at the Toronto Maple Leafs as the sum of many parts, and that includes this Calder Cup championship winning team. And we've talked about the goaltending, we talked about the experience the coaching staff of that team plays, we talked about how it can affect the overall attitude of this roster. And I agree with you 100%. This could be a part of the adjustment of the attitude of this team.
They've given John Gruden an opportunity. They moved him up from being the head coach of the American League to
And
being
he deserves that. He deserves that opportunity for the job he
100% he
did.
does. 100% he does. Again, when Johnny was breaking into the league as a player, most of the time in the American League, I was watching him play a ton. He was an industrious, hardworking, proud kid, and he earned his way up to being a really good coach. And so I'm really excited about where they've gone with this thing right now, and it makes everybody better because now people have to compete for jobs. That's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Pierre, I agree with you. I think your enthusiasm is warranted. Thank you once again for joining us. We'll be talking to you very soon because we know this offseason, it's just not done.
There's no off season this year.
There's no
Thanks,
offseason
Kyle.
anymore, Pierre. Have a good day.
Take care.